When these intrepid explorers signed up to boldly go where no one has gone before, I doubt that they had any of these wild adventures in mind. Apparently, alien space battles were just not enough. No, they had to throw in smart weapons, mind games, and killer corpses. In this live stream, we're going to be counting down the top 10 scariest episodes from Star Trek The Next Generation. So grab a phaser and a blankie, and let's start the show. Hello, and welcome to the Savage Stream, the weekly live stream where we talk all things Star Trek. And today, we are going to be covering the top 10 scariest, most disturbing, spookiest, creepiest episodes from Star Trek The Next Generation. I want to say hello to everybody who's here live and hello to everybody who's on the replay. We're going to do a top 10 countdown, but I do have one honorable mention. And I have to say, it was pretty hard to come up with this list. I started with a list of 32 terrifying episodes, and I kind of whittled it down. Hello. I'm seeing in the chat, I'm ready to be scared. I'm seeing mommy hold me. That's right. Now, before we get started, I do have a confession to make. I created some incredible clips for you guys today, and I waited a little bit too long to do that. So I have the clips, but it's just like, it's not the magic that I was going for. So bear with me on this early live stream in my journey. We're going to go through all 10. I'm going to show a quick little clip from each episode. I'll do a little summary, and I'll share why I picked it and why it made my list. But in the meantime, let me know what your top scariest episode is. Let me know in the chat so that way we can see if your episode made the list. Okay, so let's go to episode number 10. I'm not totally sure how this is going to work, so let's see. Okay, here we go. Okay, let's see. Episode 10 is Season 4, Episode 9, Final Mission. And in this episode, Picard, Wesley, and Captain Durgo crash land on some random moon. After Durgo is mummified and Picard is seriously injured, it's up to Wesley to outsmart the cave monster and access the only water source within 100 miles while they wait for rescue. The special effects are actually pretty solid on this episode. Oh, that's a little clip of what the next episode's going to be. Let me find you guys. Okay. I'm so curious how that looked. Probably not great, but that's okay. That's okay. We're going to get better and better with this technology. So hello in the chat for everyone who's joining live and everyone who's joining on the replay. The reason why I picked Final Mission for episode number 10. Now, first of all, it's not really like a creepy episode. It's not, it doesn't give you the creeps or anything, doesn't make your skin crawl. But here's why I added it to my list. This episode is just, it's one of the most terrifying scenarios that I can imagine myself being in. And I think that's the thing, is this episode is scary, not necessarily because of the aliens or the monsters or the space battles or whatever, but this episode is scary because it's so real, right? One of my greatest fears is being trapped with a small group of people in a life or death situation when one or more of those people are actively trying to get you killed. It's just like, if you've ever seen the movie, not World War Z, but what was that Tom Cruise one with the aliens who came in but it was based off of a book, whatever that was called. There's a scene where he's trying to protect his daughter and they run into some house. And then there's like some guy in the house and you have to be really quiet or the aliens will find you. And the guy is like, he starts screaming and freaking out. And then Tom Cruise has to choke him out to death to keep him from like letting the aliens know where they are. That's what this whole episode is to me. It's just that. It's like Durgo being just like, we could live or we could do things my way. So first of all, when his ship crash lands, he's got no provisions on his ship. He has no replicator. He's got no food. He's got no water. And so Picard's like, all right, let's go find shelter. Let's find water. Let's find shade because we crashed in a desert and the sun's blazing. And Durgo says, well, I don't want to leave my ship. I think we should just stay inside the ship. Inside the ship, this is a metal oven in the desert. And that's one of those moments where it's like, all right, Durgo, you do you. Wesley and I are going to go survive. But of course, Picard's being this diplomatic person and trying to all work together. And so Durgo comes along, but that's kind of the whole episode, is that Picard keeps trying to be like, come on, Durgo, let's work together. He's drinking while they're walking to go and eventually find this cave. Durgo's drinking like from a hip flask. So he didn't have any water, he didn't have any food, but he did have some space whiskey on him. And when Picard discovers it, he's like, what are you doing? First of all, that's going to make you more thirsty, not quench your thirst. Second of all, that's more valuable in case we get some kind of cut or something so we don't get an infection. And of course, Durgo is so upset about that. And how dare you take my hip flask and all these things. Well, they find the water in the cave. And for some reason, it's protected by a force field that only shows up when you try to drink the water, which is so unfortunate. I guess that's where the little Trek part of this episode comes in. So Durgo's like, just shoot it. Sure. So he shoots it, and then there's like an energy force that's protecting the water in the cave. And so it takes revenge on Durgo for shooting at it, and it mummifies him. So I guess that's one way to solve the problem, because if he hadn't been mummified, I don't know what Wesley would have done after Picard gets injured, because then it would be up to Wesley to try to convince Durgo to go along with the plan. And Durgo was the one telling Wesley, look, Picard's not going to make it. We just need to let him go. It's just you and me now, which again, if this was my worst dream with the three of them, it's my even worster dream with just Wesley and Durgo. Awful, awful scenario. Anyways, I can go on and on about this episode and how terrifying I personally find it. But that is why Final Mission made my list. Okay, I'm going to check the chats, and then we're going to go to episode number 9 on the list. So Nadia says, War of the Worlds. That's the exact thing I was thinking of. And so does PS2 Cypher. That is the exact same. That's exactly what I was thinking of. I don't know why I got World War Z. I guess because World was in there somewhere. He killed Tim Robbins. Was that the name of the person in the movie? That's a really good memory. Yeah. And then Nadia says that part was so creepy. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says there really aren't a ton of scary episodes in TNG. The only start to finish one I can think of is Genesis. A few are the creepy moments, though. Yeah, I thought of a lot. But scary, it depends on your definition of scary, right? Scary could be like this episode for me, which is a terrifying thought to be in this scenario. Scary could be monsters. Scary could be jump scares. Scary could be ghost ships, which we did come across several ghost ships. Scary could be mind games. And some of these, I think some of the episodes that made my list are mind games. But we have a variation of mind games. We've got brainwashing. We've got your thoughts become real. We've got, aliens who can control dreams, which actually is more Voyager than TNG. But you know what I mean? So we've got kind of levels of scary. And so I'll probably do another video where my tech is working a little better, where I can really break down some categories. Okay, PS2 Cypher says the actor's name is Tim Robbins. Oh, good to know. Okay. So now moving on to number 9 on the list. This comes from season 5, episode 4, and it's called Silicon Avatar. So let me see if I can make it play. Oh, okay. In this episode, an entire colony is attacked by a giant space snowflake known as the crystalline entity. Eventually, the crew discovers a way to communicate with it. However, they don't get a chance to say very much, since Dr. Marr kills it in revenge for killing her son years ago on yet another colony. And that's actually the same colony where Data was originally discovered. So originally, she thinks Data's in league with it. This episode made my list because I think the crystalline entity itself is, one, a really cool and really novel alien species, especially since most of the alien species on the show on TNG tend to be very humanoid, right? They're bipedal, their eyes face forward, they've got 2 arms, they've got, and that's because we have to have human actors play the aliens. So there's a lot of limitations, like where their anatomy can be. And whenever they try to stray too far from that, it kind of is a disaster. Like they end up with weird fur monsters or Party City masks with snake heads and dog heads. And it gets weird. But this is one of the few times when I think they did something so interesting by creating a life form that's not humanoid at all. We have this giant snowflake. How does it live in space we don't know. But when it comes to destroy a planet or a space station or a spaceship, it destroys all life on that thing, including the bacteria in the soil, which is mind-blowing. Like, how, what, huh? Um, and it opens up so many questions. Like in this episode, which is really cool. In this episode, they start to kind of communicate with it towards the end, right before Dr. Mara blows it up. And they're sending pulses to it, and it starts sending pulses back, and then it starts changing color. And it's kind of like, oh, hey, are you one of me? Like, and they're like, okay, we're getting somewhere, because maybe if they can communicate with it, they can convince it to stop devouring whole planets and find some other way to maybe synthesize its nutrition. Point is, they can open up diplomatic channels. But Dr. Mara's not here for that. And so it kind of sucks, because I'm so curious this entity. Are there more of it? We hope not. Where did it come from? How long has it been here? How long has it been roaming around? I mean, there's so many areas and avenues of exploration that are lost when this creature is destroyed. And then maybe the saddest part is, well, actually the sad part is the creature being destroyed. However, this creature is extremely deadly, extremely deadly. But the reason I feel like this alien is scary is because it's kind of like the Borg. It's not personal. It's kind of like the Borg pre-lore, right? Like it's not personal. It's going around, it's eating everything on the planet. It's not not even conscious that these other things it's eating are life forms. It's just food for it, It's like a cow eating grass and not knowing that the grass is like a living sentient thing that doesn't want to be eaten, you know what I mean? So it's not really like out to get you like most of the villains are on the show. Anyways, all that to say is I think that's a terrifying villain. A villain that is pretty much unstoppable, except for they found out how to shatter it. But before this, it's pretty much unstoppable. It's insatiable. It's extremely lethal. And there's no way to communicate with it to tell it to stop. And there's no way to escape. And it's really fast. I think it was like it goes warp something, they said in this episode. So it's like completely escapable. And to me, all of that combined equals really, really scary scenario. So I'm going to check the chat, and then I'm going to go to episode 8 on the list. Nadia says, to me, the creepiest part of the crystalline entity episode is when Dr. Mar kills it, and then she looks at Data, and she's like, I did it for you, Remy. And she's all creepy. And then PS2 Cypher is like, yeah, and Data didn't even care, which is so true. Wingray says, yeah, seeing it just erase life for the planet scared me as a child. It was terrifying. Like, not only that like blast of laser energy, but in that scene where they come out of the cave and it's just like barren. There's not a tree, not a twig. It's just barren. You're like, oh my gosh, because in the beginning of the episode, it's just, sunshine and rainbows and birds singing. And oh man, the birds, the fish, the bugs, everything's gone. It's nuts. Yeah, and Dr. Mar, yeah, she was super creepy towards Data, especially before she hated Data because she thought he was in on it with lore, and it was his big plan to lure the crystal entity there and like sick it on people. But then he because Data's programmed with all of the journals from all the colonists, he replayed part of her son's journal. And so then she was like in love with him because she's like, you're just like my son, which he's not like your son at all. But now she's all about that life. And then after she kills it and she's like, I did it for you, Remy. Data's just like, your son would not be proud of you right now. He'd be so ashamed or something like that. And you're like, ooh, a little injury to insult right there. Okay. Episode number 8 on the list. This episode comes from season 4, episode 24, and it's called Mind's Eye. Oh, hold on. Let me share my screen. In this episode, Geordi is kidnapped and brainwashed by Romulans to assassinate a Klingon governor who is accusing the Federation of giving supplies and weapons to rebels that keep attacking his colony. The investigation uncovers Ambassador Kell as the inside man for this whole plot, Thankfully, Data figures it out in time to have Geordi stopped, and Kel is handed over to face Klingon justice. I really like this episode. It's basically Manchurian Candidate in space, but I really like it because I like the intrigue. I like kind of we don't know what's going on. We know Geordi's doing something shady. We don't know that it's Krell who's in on it until like more than halfway through the episode. So we're wondering, where is he getting these orders from? The other thing that's interesting is that this is part of the whole this all comes to head in what's the name of that episode? I don't know, but this kind of keeps going where there's this Romulan plot to create a civil war amongst the Klingons and to divide the Klingons from the Federation support so that Romulus can come in and kind of control Klingon as a puppet empire, and it can also take over Vulcan in some kind of way. So there's this bigger plot going on here, and it's one of the very few episodes that has a through line, because usually, it's episodic. So usually the story, it starts, it stops, we're done. But this is one of those few times where this keeps coming up, this idea of the Romulans and the Klingons, they're doing something shady. So I like a lot of parts of this episode. I also like that we get to see through Geordi's visor. That's always a good time. I love that we get to see Data playing a detective. And the weird thing about this episode is that Geordi is actually investigating himself throughout the episode, because when he's being brainwashed and controlled, it's like he's asleep. And then when he is back to normal, he doesn't know that any time is missing, which I think is really scary. So there's a lot of good things about this episode that I enjoy. I do think it's that Ambassador Kel is very un-Klingon in this episode. Like any Klingon who works with the Romulans, and the Romulans are so sneaky. I feel like that doesn't, like, that's such a clash to me, right? Because Klingons are the ones who will walk up to you and stab you in your chest while looking in your eyes. Like, that's the Klingon way. Romulans, it's all about poisoning your soup when they're 100 miles away. You know what I mean? It's like very sneaky. You never know. You never see it coming. You don't know who was behind it. So this collaboration is a little bit weird to me, but whatever. It makes for a great episode. The reason why this episode made my list is, again, for a scary scenario. More than the episode itself. The episode's like a little disturbing, but more the thing that's scary to me is if I were Geordi, if you were Geordi, and you've been brainwashed to do terrible things, but you don't remember any of those terrible things. So you're going around assassinating people with no memory of it. And of course, you're going to be in jail forever, or, assassinate yourself, or whatever happens from the actions you're made to do, but you won't even know why. To me, that thought is very scary. That's why I made this list. The idea that you're not even in control of your own actions. You don't remember what you've been doing. You don't remember where you've been. And then when the Romulans kidnapped and brainwashed Geordi, he was supposed to be going to Risa for a vacation or a conference or something like that. And what they did was they sent somebody in his place as cover for him not being there. And then somehow they took his memories and implanted him into Geordi. I'm not sure, but they implanted false memories in Geordi of his entire vacation to Risa. So in the end, after he's been deprogrammed and the little device that was controlling him has been smashed or whatever the heck, it's been taken off the ship. He's sitting with Troy, and he's like, I don't understand, though. I have memories of being at Risa. Like, I remember going to the pool. I remember Jama Harmon. I remember all of it. And what do I do with that? And she's just like, yeah, it'll take some time, but you'll get over it. You'll recover. And I feel like her talk is like maybe even deeper than Picard's talk after Chain of Command, right? Like, which is not very deep at all. It's just a 2-second, like, you'll be fine by the next episode. No worries, buddy. But I think that in this scenario, it'd be terrifying, right? It just would be terrifying. So I'm going to check the chat and then get to the next episode on the list. When Grace I already said that. When Grace says, even fake O'Brien must suffer. Poor fake O'Brien. Nadia says, LOL. I remember the Jamaharon. I remember that part. Best of Trek, worst of Trek says the only Jamaharon Geordi gets in TNG is a fake memory. Oh my gosh. Poor Geordi, and all he needs is a Horgon. He doesn't even need any game at all. He doesn't need any good lines. He doesn't need a Coco no. He just needs to have a Horgon, and he still only gets Jamaharon with a fake implanted memory. Can somebody help this dude out? Other than a hologram. Okay, so that brings me to the next episode on the list. This comes from season 5, episode 22, and it's called Imaginary Friend, which again is a terrifying scenario. I think this one's more scary for everybody though. Little Clara Sutter's imaginary friend becomes real in this episode and immediately starts demanding that Clara take her to off-limit parts of the ship. When Counselor Troy tries to help Clara make real-life friends, Isabella doesn't like that too much. It turns out that Isabella is really one of the many alien life forms living inside the nebula that the Enterprise is exploring. She decides to destroy the entire ship because grown-ups are mean. So this one, this one's kind of interesting because, first of all, imaginary friend becomes real. That could go one of two ways. Either hilarious hijinks ensue, or it's a monster. Like this case, it's something trying to kill everyone, right? So I think a couple things about this episode are disturbing, which is why it made the list. One, your imaginary friend comes to real life, which seems exciting, but they're really weird. And they look at you really weird and they act really weird and they try to force you to do things you don't want to do. That's never good. No, that's never good at all. 2, this imaginary friend actually does have, I can't really say it's corporeal because it's like an energy being or something like that. It's like a light being, but let's just say that light is its body or something. So it's kind of a corporeal thing that clearly is a shapeshifter. It can take on any shape, which is wild. And the shape itself has mass and matter, right? Because when Isabella appears out of thin air, she's able to hold hands with Clara. So this light energy being can also kind of become anything and have real matter, which is amazing. 3, as they're going through this nebula, if you haven't seen this episode in a while, maybe give it a skip. I like it, but it's like, I don't know, maybe give it a skip. So anyways, as they're going through this nebula, for whatever reason, they're going through the nebula, they get to a point where the like filaments in this nebula start getting thicker and thicker and thicker, and the ship can't move. So they're like, all right, just back us up, get us out of the nebula. As they try to back up, the filaments get even thicker. And so they're trapped in this nebula, like they're strapped down. And what happened was Isabella is telling all her friends who control the nebula or whatever to lock the ship in place so that all of her buddies can come and destroy all life on the ship. And basically because, they came and they invaded, I think this was Isabella's way of figuring out who these people are inside their nebula, like who's invading their nebula. And after experiencing a day in the life of a child on board the Enterprise, she loses her freaking mind and is like, nah, we don't need this ship to tell any of its friends to come to our neighborhood, so we're going to get rid of it. Well, Picard ends up talking her off the ledge by telling her that, yeah, from a child's perspective, it does seem like we're mean, but really it's because we care. We give you rules because we care, and for some reason, Isabella buys that. She buys this whole explanation and she's like, all right, sounds good. So she lets the ship go. So the ship leaves the nebula, and as it's kind of edging back out into normal space, Isabella shows back up in Clara's room, and Clara's like in bed, traumatized, like all the children on the ship are. And she sees Isabella at the foot of her bed and she's like, oh, hey, you're still here, huh? And Isabella's like, hey, I'm really sorry about being such a jerk. My bad. And then she's like, and Claire's like, that's okay. And then Isabella was like, I'm sorry, I'm not your real Isabella. And Claire's like, well, you sort of were for a little bit. And then Isabella's like, will you ever come back to my nebula? And Claire's like, boo. I mean, she's a little kid, so she's like, sure, maybe someday. But no, she's not coming back. Why would anyone come back for this, girl? This is not good hospitality. And the episode goes off. So this made my list because I just think that there's so many things that are scary. The other thing too, having a lot of experience around little kids, whenever they say they see something, I'm always all ears. And it's because of episodes like this. Whenever they're like, there's something there and, they're using their imagination, I still probe a little bit deeper just to make sure it's their imagination. I don't want to be any ghost or non-corporeal alien or, hallucinations in their little brains. I want it to just be fun imagination, and we all know it's fun imagination, right? So, yeah, that's it. I'm going to check the chat and then hit the next episode on the list. Best of Trek, worst of Trek says, cue the trumpet voice Peanuts adult, right? Womp, 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 womp. Exactly. Let's see. What's next on the list? Okay. The next episode on the list is season 6, episode 5, Schisms. This one I actually always get confused with another episode. But I think again the scenario is very creepy. The episode I actually don't think is great. So if you haven't seen this episode in a while, maybe give this one a skip also. But I do think it is a creepy idea. And basically this episode is X-Files in space. In this episode, several crew members, including Riker, experience strange time gaps and exhaustion, which lead to the discovery that they are being abducted and experimented on by mysterious aliens every time they go to bed. Thankfully, Dr. Crusher finds a way to wake Riker up in the alien ship so he can fight back, distracting the aliens long enough to close a rift between subspace and regular space or something like that, because they live in a different kind of space. And then we never hear from or see these aliens ever again. Oh, so nobody saw that whole clip that I was just sharing. That's pretty funny. Well, I saw it and it was amazing. That was the episode. PS2 Cypher says that was the episode that imprinted into my childhood memory. Best of Trek, worst of Trek says, I can't take the bad guy aliens seriously. They're like Jawas from Star Wars. Yeah, let me just show you what they look like since I've been sitting here watching this scene by myself. Are Jawas the cute little fuzzies from Star Wars? Because those are adorable. Okay, you can see this now. So here's Riker on the alien ship being all experimented on. There's one of the aliens, and you can't hear it, but they make this weird clicking sound, kind of like the movie Mimic, which that movie actually was terrifying. So if you want something spooky, I would recommend that movie. So basically, Riker wakes up a little bit after this, and there's another person right there on that other table, another crewman, that he picks up and grabs and jumps through the rift, and then Geordi seals it. But before he can seal it, there's some kind of energy beam that flies through the rift from the aliens. And they're like, was that a probe? What was that? So we don't know what that is either. Oh, those are the Ewoks. Yeah, those are cute. Those little things are so cute. Clearly, I'm not as big up on my Star Wars as I am on my Star Trek. But yeah, those things are adorable. Oh, the Jawas are the little ones with like the hoods, and they're always like getting scrap metal and stuff. Let me just rewatch the episodes. Let me rewatch the movies. Yeah, so they say like maybe it's a probe or something that was shot through the rift, and they're trying to figure out what that was going to do. But it doesn't matter because we never see these aliens again. We never hear from them again. So it doesn't matter what that was. And yay, we closed the rift. But I feel like there's more questions to be asked here because these aliens, what was the point? What was the point of any of it? So when they were experimenting on these people that they abducted, for one example, that Beverly saw when she scanned Riker was that his entire arm had been detached and then surgically reattached. It's just like, what's going on? And you think like they're just curious. They're curious about what humans are. But one of the crewmen that they abduct, when they return the crewman back, that crewman dies immediately. And I forget if it was a man or a woman. I think maybe it was a man, but they die immediately because these aliens turn their blood into some kind of polymer. So they change the chemistry of the blood inside their body and murdered them. So you're like, what are they doing? Are they really trying to figure out what humanity is? Are they just like mean and, an evil, or like what is going on? I think if we had something more like that, or some kind of a little bit more understanding, I think this episode would be better, because this is not like a great episode. It's creepy. It's very X-Files, like PS2 Cypher says, but it's not really engaging. And I think that's because there's no real plot here. The whole plot is alien abductions, period. But there's no character growth or development or anything like that. The reason why X-Files was interesting is because you would follow what happened to these characters who thought they were abducted, or, there'd be like a whole storyline going on. So anyways, that's that. I'm going to check the chat and then go to the next episode on the list. Nadia says that clicking noise was really eerie. And I totally agree. Well, she says that clicking noise, man, eerie. Yes, I agree. It was creepy. I wonder if it would have been creepy if it wasn't in that context of something stealing you away at night. If it would have just been like neutral, like it's clicking, it doesn't mean anything. But in this context, yeah, it was super creepy. And I guess they were trying to do that to point out that the universal translator could not translate clicking. Guessing that's what they were going for. Wingrace says, just fill a dude with liquid polymer. He was a guy. Okay. He was a guy. Okay, now we know. Yeah, because I couldn't remember that part, but just super creepy and super disturbing. Okay, episode number, let's see what we're on. Number 5. We're halfway through the list. Episode number 5. This comes from season 4, episode 18. And it's called Identity Crisis. This one, the last one was X-Files in space. This one is definitely Blair Witch in space. Blair Witch was also super creepy. So if you're looking for something spooky to watch this season, that's another good movie to watch. In this episode, Geordi and Susanna Lighton investigate the mysterious disappearance of former crewmates after visiting the Terrakanen 3 outpost. Geordi discovers there was an invisible alien present during their away missions just before he falls into convulsions and turns into an alien himself. Thankfully, Dr. Crusher is able to find a cure and bring them back just in the nick of time, which is so Crusher of her. This episode, because it's done like the Blair Witch Project, it's really well done, actually, because the premise of it is not so far-fetched, right? People go missing. What happened to the people? That's very simple. They go to the planet. They find a shuttlecraft that's empty from one of the missing crewmen. And they're like, well, he was here, but he's not here now. They see weird footprints leading away, but they don't see anything else there. And they're like, this is just a big mystery. So all that's not that scary, but the way they do it is so scary. And this is one of like the darkest episodes, like literally physically dark. Like everything is in shadow and everything is hidden. But the part that gets scary is when Susanna starts freaking out and flipping out. And she's like, we need to get to the planet. We need to get to the planet. And Geordi's like, what is wrong with you? And then she starts breaking out in blue veins all over her body. And then her fingers start fusing together and her fingernails turns into claws. And they're like, what the heck is going on? And then Beverly tells them, she discovers that, there's some kind of parasite from the planet that's infected her and it's able to rewrite all of her DNA and it's converting her into this alien. And when you're in this form, you can you're not only invisible, but you're like, you can deflect your body signs or something like that, your life signs, so that the computer can't even find you. So you're invisible in like all the ways, not just visibly, but even like from scans and like biochemically or whatever. So Beverly's like, Geordi, you're also infected. So we got to get on this and try to figure this out. So while she's trying to figure it out, that's when Geordi kind of gets converted and transformed and disappears to the planet, which they can't find him because they can't scan for his life signs. But Susanna can find him because she was recently alienified. So she's got some kind of emotional bond or something where she can tell which of the aliens is Geordi and she can connect with him. And she's able to talk him back before it's too late. And they said something like, if we would have waited a few more hours, we would never have gotten you back. And unfortunately for all the other missing crew members and the entire colony of people who used to live on that site, they're all invisible aliens now, and there's no getting them back. Their DNA has been completely converted, which, by the way, is not at all how parasites work, but such an interesting episode, right? So I picked this episode because watching it, it really makes you jump. And it highlights things hiding in the shadows, which is there anything scarier than that? In the actual episode, you see Geordi coming up and being like, what is that shadow? There's nothing there to cast it. And you're like, oh, get out, get out, get out, get out. But all is well that ends well. You know, they get Geordi, they recover him, they recover Susanna, and then they launch some warning buoys around the planet so that the aliens are not disturbed, but also so that no unsuspecting people become aliens. Because it turns out this is how this alien life form reproduces, through infection, through infecting anyone who comes across this planet and turning it into an alien. Again, there's like a little bit of missing logic in that, but still, whatever. Still an interesting idea. I wonder. So they put these buoys saying, don't come to this planet or you'll turn into an invisible alien. But I wonder, you know, could that be an option for people? If people are like, I want to be an invisible alien, could they go if they wanted to? I don't know. I don't know how that works in space. But I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to hit episode number 4 on the list. Oh, that's interesting. Nadia says, this one is so scary. This one and Night Terrors are my top 2 scary ones, followed by conspiracies. Your top like 3 scary ones, yeah. The part where they do the holodeck simulation and figure out there was an alien presence behind one of them, that one that no one saw, OMG, exactly. And then she says it creeps me out. That scene, that was like, I don't know, the way it was revealed, you're just like, I don't know, it's freaky. They have the music playing and the way that it's revealed, there was a shadow with nothing belonging to the shadow was so creepy. And I think it was like right after Geordi made that revelation that he falls over and starts convulsing. So you're already like, what's that? And then you're like, Geordi! And then Geordi's gone. And you're like, where'd he go? I mean, this episode keeps you watching because you're just like, what the heck is happening? And here's something else that I find really fascinating. And maybe because I'm not a makeup person or an actor or whatever, but that was LeVar Burton in all of that body makeup, in that full-on head-to-toe costume, which still looks so dope. Like, the only way you could see it is if you shine that UV light or whatever and you see the veins. It looks so good. But that was really him in that head-to-toe makeup, acting, you know, running through the caves and stuff. And what I find fascinating is, like, why? Couldn't an extra do that? Like, couldn't anybody do that? Because we literally can't see who's under there. But no, it's actually Geordi. And all the times when we have, like in Genesis, when we have all the people transforming, that's really them as well. But it kind of makes more sense because you can still see their face, like under, you know, like how Riker's he's got the forehead, but it's still Riker. But I feel like in this case, it could have literally been like anybody covered in head to toe makeup, but it was LeVar Burton. Okay. Nadia says, creeps me out, which I think I read. And Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, I hate how poorly this episode reflects on Starfleet security protocols. You mean unlike all the other episodes that poorly reflect on Starfleet security protocols? Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, how many people have to run to this same planet before you put these people under guard? Nadia says, truth. When Grace says, yes, that remove the shadows scene on the holodeck was great. PS2 Cypher says, do you think that was a fate worse than death? That's a good question. No, I don't. And I don't because it's actually I don't because it kind of is like death and it kind of isn't like death. It already is like death because the person they were before is no more and will never be again. So it's exactly like death. It's not worse than death. It is death. However, they're still alive, but they're alive as some other creature and will live out the rest of their days as this other creature that has no connection to their previous life. So I don't think it's a fate worse than death. I think it's a fate equivalent to death. But the thing that I think is the worst about this super creepy episode, which is another reason why it made my list, is that how hard it is for the loved ones of the people who've been turned into these aliens, right? I was thinking about it before I hopped onto this live stream, that it's kind of like if someone you love has been sent to prison for the rest of their lives. But if they've been sent to prison, you could at least maybe visit them, right? Presumably you could visit them, or maybe even write them letters, maybe talk to them on the phone. You can still have some kind of communication with them. But it's like they've been sent to prison and then their whole memory has been wiped. So they physically exist somewhere, like their body exists somewhere, but you can never talk to them again. And they won't recognize you. They won't know you. They won't have any memories of you. and you can never connect with them again. That to me, while I think it's a fate equivalent to death for the person becoming the alien, I think it's worse for the people for the loved ones who are survived. Because it's like, we've lost so-and-so, on the job or whatever. And then they're like, what happened? And then you're like, oh, they turned into some alien creature that's invisible, that you'll never be able to find or talk to again. But they're on that planet over there. It's like, what do you even do with that information? How do you even process this? So that's another reason why I added this episode to the list, because I think the scenario is so scary from so many different angles. Eric says, would the warning kill off the species? The warning would kill off the species eventually if no one ever landed on the planet again. So we're assuming the warning is in all languages, and we're assuming no one will make the choice to go to the planet maybe to study these aliens and then accidentally get infected. But that's an interesting point, Eric, because Picard's reasoning, what he says for why he puts out those warning buoys, is to let people or is to protect the aliens on the planet. So his plan is to protect the aliens, not to lead them to extinction. But ultimately, if no one ever lands on the planet, it will lead to their extinction just the same. So that's a really interesting point. It's kind of back to our prime directive, schmime directive, right? It's like, no matter what you do, you're involved. You are involved, and you're going to have some kind of effect on these people. I will say I would rather know than not know that there's a possibility that I'll be turned into another alien if I land on this planet. However, apparently Beverly has created a cure. So like, could also add that to the warning buoy. If you want to go down the planet, just make, here's the recipe for the cure. Here's the pattern for your replicator. So you can at least make that to inoculate yourself before you go or after you get back to the ship. I don't know. Nadia says it's the Borg genocide virus question all over again. She also says, I cannot watch Identity Crisis or Night Terrors. Man, cannot watch them. PS2 Cypher says it's like purgatory. And then PS2 Cypher says, did the species have a lifespan? Of course. I mean, they're living things, so they don't live forever. But we don't know what the lifespan is, especially since we just learned that they exist and that they're invisible. And that's it. That's all we know about this. Oh, and that they look really cool in black light. That's all we know about these aliens. So presumably, they will die eventually because all living things die. But we don't know if it's going to be the same lifetime as the thing that they took over, or if it's going to be totally different. Now, I would suspect it'd be totally different from whatever their original plan was, because the DNA is completely transformed into whatever the alien DNA is. So the age of a person is based on the length of their DNA strands, which gets shorter over our lifetimes. So since this parasite has rewired all their DNA, who knows? Who knows how long it is? Maybe they're like totally reborn and they have a whole nother 100 years. Who knows? Nadia says maybe the Jurassic Park life finds a way theme would apply to this species. The warning keeps people away, so the species finds another way to reproduce. Totally could be. Totally could be. Or the species could find a way using some of the technology and crash shuttles and whatnot on the planet to just destroy the warning buoys. Boom. Okay. Next episode on the list. This is 4 on the list. And this comes from season 1, episode 25. And this is Conspiracy. So Nadia, you already mentioned this. And this episode it's creepy in a different way, right? Each one of these has had their own flavor of creepy. This one is more kind of the traditional monsters under the bed creepy. In this episode, Picard and Riker investigate a mysterious conspiracy involving disgusting alien parasites infiltrating Starfleet's highest ranks. Even Picard's old friend, Admiral Quinn, who first alerted him to this possibility, is eventually infected. Things erupt literally in Starfleet headquarters when they discover and subsequently destroy the mother organism stuffed inside of Remick. This is a scene I have not seen since the 90s because it's so freaking disturbing. Now, some people feel like this episode is just like too dumb to be scary. That's fair. That's fair. It is kind of dumb, and the special effects are not awesome. Okay. Did you see that battle of the stunt doubles? However, once again, it's the scenario, which is why it landed so high on this list. The idea that the people in power, and in this case, it's like So we've got all the Federation, which has a governing body. And if the people in the highest, most influential locations are all, controlled by these parasites, now they were like, in this episode, they were kind of like siphoning off certain other people who were in power and then infecting them, turning them into parasite controlled people. But then there was another group that were rebelling against the parasites. So they just blew them up. There's like 5 different ships that they just blew up. So it's like, get with the program or get destroyed. And the other thing is that these aliens, these parasites, they're kind of like the opposite of the crystalline entity or the opposite of the Borg. They are extremely involved in this process, right? They are super sneaky, and they have a whole elaborate plan, presumably to take over all life in the Federation. We don't know. We don't know what their end game was. We don't know what the plan was. We do know, though, that they were being really sneaky, that somehow they got up to the tippy tops and then just started working their way down the chain, taking over here and there and everywhere, which, yeah, it's creepy. And then apparently these parasites make you super strong, and then they make you eat grub worms for some reason. It's weird. Everything about it is disturbing. This episode is not one I add to my rewatch list. I do think it's a really compelling episode because there's so much mystery and you're like, what's going to happen? And we've seen Admiral Quinn and Remick before. Remick landed on, for our podcast, the TNG podcast, Remick landed on one of our most punchable faces of Starfleet list because he was such a jerk the first time we meet him. But even though he was a jerk, he didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be stuffed full of parasites. Come on, dude. Yeah, and originally, Remick was one of the ones investigating this claim that there was something fishy going on inside of Starfleet or whatever. So, yeah, the whole scenario is terrifying. And then at the end, when Picard is down in Starfleet headquarters, okay, this is best of Trek, worst of Trek. You were just talking about security protocols. So Picard's like, okay, the heads of the Federation want us to come down, me and Riker to come down and chat with them. And Worf, the first thing he says is, take your phaser, because we don't know who we can trust. And Picard's like, one does not take their phaser into Starfleet headquarters. That's completely unacceptable. Okay, but in this case, maybe take a phaser, because this is like a really special scenario. And what are they going to do? Like, are they going to be like, how dare you bring a phaser into my presence? Are they going to clutch their pearls? So what? But anyways, they go down completely unarmed. And after that fight where Quinn beats the crap out of Riker, a whole bunch of other people come and he fights them too. And then ultimately Beverly stuns him and they remove the parasite from him. And I don't remember if Quinn survives that. I don't remember that. But in any case, removes the parasite and they kind of figure out how these parasites are working. But the big plan was for Quinn to turn Riker into one of them. So Beverly and Riker hatch a plan to make Riker pretend like he's one of them. They put a little fake like needle coming out of his neck. Like that's what they all have. And then he actually starts eating grubs to play along with it. And then he turns the tables and they, and you see the end result between Riker and Picard blasting away at space scorpions and space parasites and the little space baby that pops out of Remick's stomach. But I think this episode it's just creepy. It's disturbing. It's the thought that the people who are in charge are the ones who are trying to destroy everything. But they're trying to trick you to make you think they're not. Just everything about that. It's like, where do you even go? Because they're the highest authority in this scenario. So where do you go to get more help from them? And he can't go to other captains because the captain's ships are being blown up left and right. And some of them are being converted to parasite controlled people. And again, this is very similar to the final mission where it's like, you're kind of trapped, how do you get out? And there's no one, who can you trust? So yeah, this whole scenario, terrifying. I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to hit episode number 3 on the list. Nadia says, yes, conspiracy. Another one from your list. Best of Trek, worst of Trek says, too busy laughing at claymation bugs and exploding meatheads to be scared. I wish that was me. I wish when I was a kid, I would have been like, oh my gosh, this is so dumb. Ha ha ha. That was not my reaction. I was like so horrified. I don't even remember how old I was when I saw this particular episode. I was probably like 8 or something like that. But I remember the head exploding. And you got to keep in mind, we've never seen something like that on Star Trek at this point. And I don't know if we've seen something like that since. But when people get blasted with a phaser in season 1, they just kind of fall down. except for in the case of Yuta, which I don't remember if she was in season 1, but she dissolves. She just disappears, right? So it's either you just fall down, you faint politely, or you completely disappear. Either way, that's not that traumatic. It's not like being blasted with some kind of earth weapon where parts go flying, right? It's pretty contained. So to see someone's head explode off their body, it was awful. It was just like it was such a shock for me, for my little heart, because I did not expect something like that. I thought they were going to shoot it with a phaser and Remick was going to stand back up, because that's what the really tough bad guys do. They're like, "Oh, you think you can phase me? That's not enough." And then they get up and you shoot them a couple more times and then they fall down, right? So that's what I thought was going to happen, but that's not what happened. His head exploded. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And then as they're sitting there with like the pieces falling from the sky and Riker and Picard are just staring at it, I was like, okay, that happened. And I'm like, I'm trying to decompress, trying to take in what just happened. While I'm still trying to take this in, we start hearing a high-pitched screaming sound from his chest, which dissolves to find another gross monster. Done. I was just done. I was just totally done. And like I said, even when I reviewed this episode for our podcast, I turned my head away during those last few scenes. I know they look dumb. I know that the special effects does not hold up, but I still remember the like visceral reaction of little me seeing so much carnage on a show that usually doesn't have any at all. So yeah, the scenario's creepy. The bugs are creepy. The claymation bugs, exploding meat, creepy, all creepy. Eric says, "I wish they revisited this alien." But do you? Do we want more of these little scorpion things? This episode also similar to the X-Files 1 Schisms, where they had the probe that went out and we never know what happened. At the end of this episode, we discover that the Remick mother organism was sending out a homing beacon. And that's how the episode ends. It ends with this creepy, like, bing, bing, bing. And the idea was that it was sending out this homing beacon to wherever its brethren are to say, "Hey, fresh meat over here in the Alpha Quadrant." And so in the end, they're kind of like looking at each other like, "Oh no, something bad is coming." But then we never talk about these aliens ever again. We never see them again. We never talk about them again. This would have been a really good one to bring back. The way they kept bringing back Sayla and the Romulans, this would have been a good one to bring back, just because. But it's like, again, it's really hard to defeat it, right? And after they've had this big battle, it would cheapen it if they did this over and over and over. But yeah, I agree with you. Having them come back, even if, let's say, they landed on some other planet, so it wasn't Starfleet headquarters this time, but their master plan is restarting on some like outlying planet or colony, that'd be something. I probably wouldn't watch that episode either, because it'd probably creep me out, but it's an interesting idea. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says they did bring them back in Star Trek Online. The Bluegills. PS2 Cypher also says they came back in Star Trek Online. See, I would have never thought I want them back, but that's interesting to know. Apparently, you, Eric, were not the only person wanting these aliens to have a cameo. Okay, so let's tie this up. I just have a few more left on the list. Next, we have number 3. This comes from season 7, episode 19, and it is the episode called Genesis. It's actually one of my favorite episodes. It's super creepy, but it's definitely it's really well done. And I think the special effects hold up pretty well for the most part. Hold on a second. Can you see this? Am I just looking? Nope, you can't see it. Okay. There we go. In this episode, Data and Picard return from an away mission to find the ship in chaos. The Enterprise crew begins to devolve into primitive life forms after an infectious synthetic T-cell gets loose on board. The solution comes from amniotic antibodies found in the now pregnant nurse Agawa. Also, Spot has kittens and then turns into a lizard. There's a lot of stuff going on in this episode. But it looks so good, like Troy's fish thing and Riker's caveman thing. And also we see Reginald Barclay as a giant spider, which is totally terrifying. The only place is right here. This is where I will say the CGI doesn't, totally hold up, because CGI is always a lot harder than practical effects. But I still think it looks pretty solid. This looks Planet of the Apes quality to me. That right there is Nurse Sagawa. So I put this episode on the list because the whole scenario, again, it's the scenario. The scenario is really terrifying, right? This idea that you're on an away mission and you come back and the whole ship is dark, and you saw it a little bit in the beginning of the clip, but it's like there's also clutter everywhere, which the Enterprise is never cluttered. There's never one piece of dirt or trash or spare parts laying around anywhere, but you just see clutter everywhere. Like people have just been ransacking the place. There's actually one part where Data and Picard go onto the bridge, and there's a guy sitting in the helms, like where I think where Data usually sits, and he's got like a huge chunk torn out of him. So someone else on the ship has eaten this man, or at least has mauled him and left him because didn't finish him off. And I wonder about that. Like, do we know which person? Wasn't it Worf? I don't know. Do we know which person ate this guy? And also, like, do they know when everyone recovers? Are they like, oh shoot, that was me. I totally ate that guy. I don't know. I wonder, again, the psychological ramifications of such an experience as this. But I think this episode it's terrifying to watch because this one is full of jump scares. It's full of creepy music, lots of dark moments. Some parts that don't really make sense. Like Worf turns into some big monster and is chasing Picard through the hallway so he can give Data time to create some antidote, which for some reason it's going to take him like an hour to make when normally these things take about 10 seconds. But whatever, that's neither here nor there. It's a really good episode. It's super creepy. One of the creepiest things about it is not the idea of the de-evolution. That's just so cool. Like from a scientific level, that's so interesting. But it's the fact that all of these de-evolved primitive species are extremely violent and kind of mindless, right? Like they just will attack anything that moves. And so you wonder how many crew members are left alive after this cure goes through the entire ship. We don't get that answer. But this, again, it's kind of like that previous episode we were talking about, the Blair Witch episode, where you're like, how do you tell someone's loved one that your person has been turned into an invisible alien? I'm so sorry, you'll never see Uncle Reg again or whatever. The same thing, like, yeah, your husband or your brother or your sister or whatever was mauled by one of the other crewmen because that crewman turned into a bear. I just wonder things like this. But anyways, if you have not seen this episode in a while, give this one a watch. This is one of my favorite episodes of all of TNG. It's really well done. Like I said, the effects hold up. The storyline's super compelling. There's a few plot holes in there where you're like, that doesn't make sense. Why would anyone do that? For example, T-cells don't do that at all. That's not at all how T-cells work. But whatever. That's neither here nor there. It's still a really good episode, and I definitely recommend watching this one. I have one more episode on the list, which is super creepy, but I'm not going to recommend watching this episode. I'm going to say probably give this one a skip. I don't know. We'll see. We'll talk about it and we'll see what you think. But I'm going to check the chat and then we'll hit episode 1 on the list. Windgrace says, I think early ideas were for them to be in Picard season 3 before they went with the changelings. Oh, that would be so interesting. So Windgrace is saying that one of the ideas was that in Picard season 3, we would have those parasite aliens from Conspiracy show back up and have some kind of big showdown. Like maybe they've been secretly working against the Federation for the last 80 years or however long it was supposed to have taken between the end of TNG and the beginning of Picard season 3. That's interesting. Do we love that idea more than what they went with the changelings? I don't know. I think I like the idea of the changelings. But the creepy thing about the parasites is when they infect somebody, that person still looks like them. They just act weird. Like, and they don't have any of their memories or whatever. How do they even effectively pretend to be that person? I don't know. But with the changelings, they're shapeshifters versus this is the same body. Like if you run the DNA, it's going to be the same body. So I feel like they'd be harder to catch, except for that they've got that pokey thing sticking out of their neck. I think that would be a dead giveaway. So maybe they need to work on that. But aside from that, I feel like they'd be hard to catch. I don't know. Let me know what you think. If that would have been a better way to go in that episode, or for season 3 of Picard. PS2 Cypher says, that was better than the Voyager Salamander episode. Let me tell you, PS2 Cypher, everything is better than the Voyager Salamander episode. If I never see, hear, or speak of that episode again, it will be too soon. Give that episode a skip. Let's all give that episode a skip. When Grace says, not the crew, the ship was filled with families too. Oh yeah, you're right. I totally forgot about that, which is even worse. Oh my gosh. So when Grace is saying the whole ship was filled with families, including kids, so when this de-evolution happened, it also would happen to all the families and the kids. Just awful. Like the level of impact is so massive because the ship has over 1,000 people in the complement. So over 1,000 people have become spiders and fish and bears and frogs or whatever the heck. And they're going around, and some of them are predator and some of them are prey and some of them are who knows what. It's just, yeah, it is just a terrifying scenario all around. Okay, episode number 1 on the list. This comes from season 6, episode 21, and it's called Frame of Mind. Hold on a second. Did I skip one? Oh, I totally skipped one. Hold on. Hold on a second. Oh, I skipped number 2. Okay, so episode number 2 comes from season 4, episode 17, and it's called Night Terrors. Okay, so episode 2 is Night Terrors. Which I think is this one. Yes. Okay. Are you seeing that? Okay. So hold on, let me just make sure you're all seeing it. Okay. Yes. Okay, it's playing. Good. Okay, so in this episode, the crew is looking for this ship called the USS Britain, which is what we're seeing here. And when they come across them, they find that every single crew member is dead, and they've each killed each other, with the exception of one betazoid that they find hiding in a closet. So when they try to leave, they realize that they're trapped in this same space and they're not able to dream, which is leading them to all have these crazy delusions, except for Counselor Troy, who has a dream that contains the solution, which is to work with these psychic aliens to create an explosion, which lets both ships go free and get out of this area. So this episode made the list because of the idea that you can't the idea that people can't sleep. I guess they can sleep, but they can't reach REM sleep. But the idea that people can't sleep, people can't dream, and that makes them get delusional and pretty much go crazy and makes them all super violent. And then they start attacking each other. And then everyone on the ship is dead because nobody can sleep. Now, I said before that that's not how parasites work. And I said before that that's not how T cells work. I have no idea how dreams work. So if you're a dream expert, let me know if this is a thing that could happen. Because I guess people get irritable without sleep, but homicidal? I don't know. I watch a lot of crime shows, and sleep sometimes, this totally happens sometimes. People have insomnia and they go wild. So I think this episode is really, it's really terrifying. Like, all the delusions are pretty scary, especially with Beverly in the morgue and like the dead bodies from the Britain coming back to life. And I mean, it's just really creepy. Riker finds some snakes in his bed. Picard thinks he's going to be smashed inside the turbo lift. I mean, people are having all kinds of delusions. Data ends up taking over the ship because he's the only one who, at this point in the show, cannot dream. So he's not affected. But when Troy is successful and they escape this Tychen rift that they're stuck in, you just see everyone has these like dark circles under their eyes, and everyone is so exhausted, and everyone is so tired, and just like, I don't know, there's just, it's kind of like, you know, the last episode where we have all these aliens and running around the ship. We have all these, not aliens, all these de-evolved humanoids running around the ship doing who knows what. There's a lot of energy in that, right? There's running, there's hiding, there's all these things. This episode is just like a battery that's running down slowly until it's gone. And it's pretty scary. And so I made this number 2 on the list because I think the idea of not being able to sleep is already scary. And it kind of reminds me of Freddy Krueger. So this would be Freddy Krueger in space. Freddy Krueger is a terrifying movie. When I watched the first movie as a kid, I don't think I slept for like a week, because the idea that something could kill you in your sleep is just beyond what my little head could and heart could bear, right? In this case, It's the lack of sleep that makes you want to kill someone or them kill you or whatever's going on in this episode. That's really, really wild. So yeah, I think the whole scenario is really scary. Thankfully, Troy saves the day. The special effects for that whole dream thing is really dumb. Like, it's one of my least favorite things in Trek, but the concept I think is really good. This episode definitely would not recommend watching this one. I don't think it's as compelling as something like Genesis, but it is an interesting thought. So I'm going to check the chat and then we'll go to number 1, which I already said what it is a few minutes ago. PS2 Cypher says, I think that was also an X-Files episode. Yeah, X-Files is funny because the whole plan for X-Files was supposed to be like, we talk about aliens. But almost from the minute that they started, they were doing Bigfoot, they were doing the Loch Ness Monster, they're doing vampires, they're doing that like fish person who lived in the toilet, they're doing the guy who stretches through like tiny little spaces and stuff. And yeah, they really didn't stick to aliens that much. That was their one through line, their one arcs. All their arcs were connected to aliens, but all their episodic ones were just like all over the place. So you could probably say almost everything in Star Trek. They try to do something like that on X-Files. X-Files is another show that I really love. Eric says, it gives me the Event Horizon movie vibe. Yes, absolutely. Event Horizon, again, it's like Freddy Krueger. It's Freddy Krueger in space. Absolutely. That's another movie like I cannot watch. I recently rewatched it with friends. It was better with people than when I originally watched it by myself. And the special effects don't super hold up like a lot of them. So it's kind of like the Scorpion, the conspiracy episode where you're like, oh, this looks so fake. It's not even scary. But the concept is so scary. The concept in Event Horizon is so scary. And the concept here is really scary that you're helpless and asleep and things are attacking you, or you think you're asleep or you think you're awake, but you're not, you're asleep. I mean, all of that is really scary. Okay, so that takes me to episode number 1 on the list, which comes from season 6, episode 21, Frame of Mind. Speaking of not knowing whether you're awake or asleep, that's why this episode makes the top of the list. Okay, which is this one. So in this episode, Riker finds himself trapped in a nightmarish psychiatric facility, unsure of if he's really a Starfleet officer or if he's just losing his mind. It's also confusing because back on the Enterprise, he's actually acting in a play where he's supposed to be in a psychiatric institution. His reality fractures over and over and over again until he finds himself in the real world. Or does he? And I think that's the crux of it right there. The fact that Riker never really knows what's going on. Like, in the beginning, we're watching him do this play. And he's pretending to be in the psychiatric ward, and he goes through a door on set. And when he walks through the door, he's in a real facility. And they're like, oh, you're pretending to be a Starfleet officer again. Ha, ha, ha. Get back to your cell, or it's time to eat your gruel, or whatever. So then he's like, what? And they're like, yeah, it's all a game, this whole fantasy about you being in Starfleet. And he's like, no, it's real. And they're like, it's really not. And so then he like goes to sleep there and wakes up, and now he's back on the Enterprise. And he's like, oh, I guess that other thing was just a bad dream. And then and he just keeps going back and forth and back and forth. And at this part of the episode that I just showed, he's been rescued from the crew, by the crew of the Enterprise. And at first he resisted rescue because he was really believing that he was crazy. So when Beverly came and she was like, we're trying to get you out of here, Will, he's like, I'm not listening. When Worf tried to break him out, he called for the guards and he was like, I don't want to go. I don't know who you are. You're trying to kidnap me. Like, he totally believed that he was crazy, that he was never on a starship and all this stuff. But then they rescue him. They bring him to the ship and he's like, wow, I can't believe I thought that I was really a crazy person. I'm not crazy. I am a Starfleet officer. But then his head starts bleeding and it keeps bleeding. He's like, how can it be bleeding when Beverly just healed me? What's going on? This isn't real. So he shoots himself with a phaser and then he's back in the facility. And he's like, wait, if I shot myself, why am I still here? And why is there a facility? And why do I have a phaser? And they're like, it's not a phaser. You're not holding a phaser. And he's like, it is a phaser. So then he shoots one of them and they disappear. And he's like, what happened to him? And the guy's like, it's just complicated. He's like, what's going on? So then he's like, I'm setting this to level 16. This should blast a hole in the side of the building. And he shoots it and then like it shatters and he's back on the ship and now he's in a play. And you're just like, oh my gosh, this thing is like the worst fever dream. And I actually like this episode because I like seeing Jonathan Frakes flex his acting muscles and being able to do more than just saying like, "I, sir," right? This is the whole episode of seeing him really, really sell that he is losing control of what reality is. In the meantime, we see his reality just keeps fluctuating, and we as the viewers don't know what's real or not either. We're like, wait, which one is real? Because we know he is an officer, but is he really in this facility? And if so, when or how long or how did he get here or how will he get out or all these things. Then at the very end, he wakes up and he's being like not brainwashed, but like not mind controlled, but like he's in some restraint that these aliens have him in, and they're trying to get the codes for a Starfleet ship, something, something from his head. So there is something in his head, and they're trying to stimulate parts of his memory so that they can extract this secret code from him. And his mind has generated this whole elaborate idea of the play in order to keep them from getting the codes. That's what Beverly figures out at the end. So he wakes up with this machine and he like pulls it off and he fights them and he gets saved or whatever. And then at the very end, he tells Beverly, I won't be able to sleep as long as this set is up. And he rips the entire set from the play down with his bare hands. But I feel like after everything he's been through, how does he know this is real? How does he know anything's real? And that is why this is number one on my list. How does anyone know that any of this is real? It's just a terrifying thought. Yeah. So that is that. That is number 10 on the list, or that's the number one on the list. I have one honorable mention, and that comes from season 3, episode 18, and it's the episode called Allegiance. And that's the episode where Picard gets kidnapped, and then he gets replaced by a double, and then the double takes the ship into serious danger and almost gets it exploded, whereas Picard is trapped with the other kidnapped victims, and they have to work together to try to get out. Now, I put this in honorable mention category because, again, it's not like jump scares or anything like that, but the idea of being kidnapped is already scary. But then the other idea of being replaced, so nobody even knows you were kidnapped, is like a very nice Star Trek twist on that trope, right? Is like no one's even going to come looking for you because they've replaced you with a perfect double. Now, the thing that they did wrong was that the duplicate Picard is awful. Like, he's a terrible Picard. He somehow has Picard's memories and stuff like that, but he's just doing all this wild stuff that Picard would never do. Now, if he didn't do that, if he played by the rules a little bit more, or just like backed up and let Riker take control, or, you know, pretended to be sick or whatever, presumably they wouldn't know that the real Picard was gone for who knows how long, which again, I think is terrifying. So that's it for me. That is everything on the list. If you've enjoyed this, be sure to hit that like button and be sure to subscribe because we do this conversation every single Wednesday. So I look forward to seeing you next week for more Trek Talk. Talk soon. Bye.